tuning in. My name's Ashlyn.
Hey, this is Bruce. Glad you're joining with us for the Life Report. We have a special guest, Dominique White, who's with us. And Ashlyn, I'll let you kind of get things started and introduce her a little bit.
Yeah, Dominique has so graciously agreed to join us and just share a little bit of her story with us and how she went from an unexpected pregnancy to a closed adoption. But I'm not going to ruin the ending because she definitely tells it best.
Yeah, thanks for being with us, Dominique. Would you introduce yourself just real quick, kind of where you're at in life right now, and give us some sense of just how things are going, how you're managing, especially with the quarantine and coronavirus and all this stuff in place?
We are surviving. I'm an extrovert, so I'm trying to mentally keep myself by being so distant from people, but it's a sweet time of rest for us, so we're keeping it together. But right now, just I'm single mom to Easton, birth mom to Everett, placed him 3 years ago for adoption, and currently right now just working full time and taking care of my little one, and 24 now. I always forget my age.
That's okay. It seems like the years fly by. Age is an easy thing to forget.
Yeah.
But so to jump into your story for anybody who hasn't heard it before, I know you've shared it a lot, which is awesome, but could you sort of give us, I guess, the Cliff Note version of your timeline?
Yeah. So timeline would be I was expecting my first unplanned pregnancy or walking through that when I was 17. And that is who I'm parenting now, Easton. He just turned 7 this past month in March. And then fast forward a few years after that, I was 21 on a spring break trip and found out that I was facing my second unplanned pregnancy. And through that, immediately, my first thought was that I was contemplating walking the line of terminating the pregnancy, and was pretty confident that that was what I was going to do, and then ended up having a conversation with someone from our young adults ministry at our church, Watermark, and she was able to just walk me through that and give me other options that I had never heard before, and I ended up placing Everett for adoption without a lot of knowledge of what adoption was, with a awesome family who is local to Dallas. And so we left the hospital in a fully closed adoption, and then we started navigating maybe a month or 2 months in to start opening the adoption. So, and we're 3 years in now, so here we are.
Yeah, that is awesome. Give us just a sense, because whenever I think of somebody with an unplanned, unexpected pregnancy, I have sort of this mindset of the sky is falling, right? And just this is crisis mode. And obviously you'd experienced that for the first time when you were 17. And so now you're again kind of in that spot. But how did you feel just kind of in those first moments, finding out you were pregnant, whether it was kind of the first time with Easton or whether it was the second time with Everett?
I think the first time being 17 and being in my mom's house, I was extremely fearful of, my only thought was, what is my mom going to think? So I immediately told my sisters, and I was just scared to tell her. That's as far as I could think. I did not think about anything else, whether or not I was going to keep him or not keep him, or in regards to whether I was going to terminate that pregnancy, or didn't know what adoption was, so couldn't even contemplate that. But my immediate thought was, I'm so scared to tell my mom. And so that looked a lot different, living in her house, and just being 17 is so different than being 21. So, but definitely still really scared and shocked. The crazy thought is how did this happen? And it's okay, well, obviously we know that this can happen. And with Everett, the child that I placed for adoption, my first immediate thoughts were just, I was scared of people finding out. I was just fear of man, ultimately, in so many aspects of not wanting to feel embarrassed or judged. Were people going to think, oh, she's so stupid, of course she ended up pregnant again, or she's going to ruin her life by having another child. Fearful to tell who I thought at the time was the birth father, and so was really, really scared to have that conversation because we were not on good terms at the time. And yeah, really just fear of like embarrassment and a lot of shame. Like, how did I let myself get in this situation again?
Yeah. So, I mean, you addressed some of the issues that I think are just what everybody kind of assumes, and it is what people think, right? It is that sort of like how did you get in this spot again? Sort of that almost that shaming mindset that's certainly not helpful, but is also very natural. And then just that I wasn't so concerned that I was pregnant. I mean, that was obviously an issue, but it was more of the I have to now tell people, especially people that I love, that I care about, that I don't want to disappoint, that I don't want to let down. What was the conversation with your mom like when you did tell her? Or why do you think that was maybe the stronger impulse of worry as opposed to how am I going to parent this child?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. I think it's just that idea I'm really gonna let this person down. And she had so many, hopes and dreams, and just always, we didn't have the best home life, but she did speak highly of me in this sense. She each had our own thing, me and my two younger sisters. She had the one go-to thing that she would really just tell people about when she introduced us to somebody. And for me, that was that I was a straight A student, and I was just really good at sports, and just that overall, like, kind of an all-American girl. Like, I just did well, and I was on a different path than kind of what my sisters were on. And so I just saw that completely shatter in front of me, in the sense of like, oh my gosh, I'm no longer this perfect person that my mom thinks that I am. And that means that I have to share with her, which I knew that she always knew that I was, partying and doing things that I shouldn't have been doing, but we never had that conversation. We never had that back and forth conversation about what that was like, but she knew that it was happening. I knew she knew. But to actually like say that out loud, hey, I'm pregnant, where we know this is where this started. We know that means that I was drinking and partying, and that was really scary to just share. It was more than just I'm pregnant. Like, you're sharing so much more than that automatically by just saying those words.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. Completely understandable, of course. And I think if not the same fear, I do think that everybody facing an unplanned, unexpected pregnancy is in some state of fear, whether it's their mom or, like you mentioned, the dad in the picture or not in the picture. Looking back on all of that, and just like you said, the fear of man, is there anything that you would tell somebody today who's maybe facing an unplanned pregnancy? How would you tell them to like walk through that fear?
Yeah, I would say that fear is really just a means to the enemy wanting to isolate you. And so it can be really paralyzing, which leads you into places and spaces with people that you shouldn't be with. And that most likely the people that you are so fearful of telling, their initial reaction maybe is shocking. Just as much as it was for you, for them, it could be shocking. But ultimately, you will see people rally around you, and maybe it's just one person or two or a community of people like it was for me, but people will rally around you to walk with you through that, because nobody who loves you wants you to be afraid to share anything with them. But I think that just initial react, give them space to have that, and then and know that the reality is it possibly can be, a scary moment of just like, whoa, they may just be really upset with me or something. But and my mom was really upset with me the first time. And so, and my sister's upset with me the second time around, and just like, what are you doing? But after, it only took that one conversation. And once we got past that, it was just like, what can we do to help you? We want to be here for you. And then as I started to share and be vulnerable and just invite people into that space, they wanted to be there, and they showed me that in so many different ways. So
that is so cool. I bet your mom is a great grandma now, and it sounds like your kiddos have plenty of aunts to love on them too. That's so awesome. So being in those moments and reaching out to somebody else, especially the second time around with Everett, you mentioned a friend who sort of like changed your perspective. And I think you meant towards the possibility of making an adoption plan. Can you walk us through sort of like how that went, and maybe if there were any myths that you had, or like preconceived notions of what a closed adoption or any adoption would look like, and maybe now standing on the other side of that, how has your perspective changed?
So it started off, I met her a month before I went on vacation, and I met two, and up at the front in about something unrelated to this topic altogether. You can walk up at the front at porch sometimes, and they'll have volunteers you can ask questions to or pray with you. And so there were two women up there, Tracy and Liz. And so they followed up with me a few times, and quite a few times, and I just ignored them for a while until this came up. And I just was sitting at a red light, and I just was like, who am I going to, like, who can know this? Like, where can I go without judgment? And I remember scrolling through my contacts, and I had put the praying hands emoji next to Tracy's name. And so I just remember she's this woman from church. I don't really know her, and she doesn't really know me, but I can't get in trouble with her. She's unrelated, like not emotionally attached to this situation. And so I was like, I feel like I can go to her and she won't judge me. And so I asked her, hey, what does it look like if I have an abortion? Can I still go to heaven for that? And obviously that was a longer answer that she had in response to that. And it was really sweet and so encouraging what she had to say. But she just asked if I'd be willing to meet up with my birth son's now adoptive mother, Allie. And that Allie had a story similar to mine, and had made a decision that she would love to share with me. And so I was open to that at first, but then she mentioned that Allie would also possibly be willing to adopt Everett. And I immediately shut down the response to that, because adoption, I did not know anybody who was adopted. My view of adoption was what I now know as foster care. And so it was this, the government comes in and takes your child, quote unquote, and you have no say. And it's this very like abrasive situation. Which I know now is not foster care, but my view of what I thought it was very just harsh. It made me feel like I was not a good mom if I made that choice. And abortion at the time felt like, if those are my two options, my understanding of, even then, I had very little understanding of what abortion was. I thought that was the best decision. And so I kind of blew her off for a while. And then after a while.
Would you expound on what you did understand about abortion at that time? Like you said, you didn't understand that much, but kind of what was your perspective of what abortion was?
Yeah, I mean, in high school, often, and so here or there in a very like down low kind of way between girls, like in the scary moments, like whispers behind people's backs of like, oh, that's what she did. So I knew that like it felt taboo, like it's not something that you maybe share with the whole entire world all the time, is what my initial thought was. And then also was that I'll go in to have a procedure. It's not going to be that big a deal. The hardest part about that was going to be coming up with the funds. So I thought in the moment it would be hard going into it, and then I'd come out and I'd be fine because problem solved. I was pregnant and I just didn't want to be pregnant anymore. So I figured it was the solution to my problem. It's to me that it's way more than that and so much more emotional. And regardless of what decision I made, whether that be adoption or whether I chose to parent or I chose to have an abortion, like there was going to be mostly within the abortion and adoption that there was going to just be grief. Like it didn't just end there. It's not this solution to a problem and one little fix to this lifetime of what I thought was suffering. It is a lot of stuff that goes into after that.
So do you didn't know like what the abortion procedures were, or did you have like a good grasp of like when life began? Like would you have said, oh, it was just a clump of cells, or kind of what thoughts did you have about like when a human becomes a human, those types of things that, or when did you learn about that?
I learned after placing Everett for adoption that life started at conception. And I did not know that. I didn't know anything. Like I didn't know I know that at some point I had wanted to start looking at abortion procedures online because you can Google them. And it didn't seem as bad when you get a non-graphic version of that. And so I really didn't have very much of an idea of what that was. I have since watched videos of what that is and have completely changed my view on that. But I just, at the time, I thought that honestly, and I think that even if I did know what the abortion procedure is, I think that I still would have desired to do it because it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. The fear paralyzes you into being in situations where you don't care to ask questions. You just want people who are going to not judge you, or you're going to feel like you're not being judged, and you just want somewhere to go where somebody's going to say, hey, this is the answer to your problem. And everything else seemed in my mind, before talking with anybody, in the midst of my fear and just my inner dialogue, it seemed harder to do everything else. So,
wow, thanks for just such an honest answer there. That's really, I guess I would say, just like raw and vulnerable of you to explain that, because I think a lot of women would just meet you on that same level, especially in the before and after, when you're considering an abortion, when you're caught in that unknown period. I do want to take you back, though, because I think it's really important. I want to hit a little more on those preconceived notions as you made the switch to make an adoption plan and what you know after the fact now.
Yeah, I think so many women, I would go back to even your question before of like, hey, what would you tell women? Just educate yourself. Like, you have time. So this isn't like, depending on when you find out you're pregnant, I know everybody's situation is different, but just give yourself time to process what you're really deciding on. Like, this is a forever decision regardless of what happens, but yeah, I think my preconceived notions about adopt, it's crazy because nobody goes to like, well, let's educate you about this stuff. And you can at certain pregnancy resource centers and things like that, but it's very formal and it's just like, you should go seek that out on your own. So to go back to that, I just had a very skewed view of what the foster care system was. And I thought that the only type of adoption was foster care. And so that was it for me automatically in my skewed version of those things. I thought absolutely not. I would not choose willingly to, and I think to just admit ultimately that I can't do this, that I can't be a mom. It feels like that's what you're saying in the midst of like saying, hey, I want to make an adoption plan right at the beginning. If you don't have education on what it is, it can really easily feel like you're giving up. And there's so many factors that play into that, but a lot of it is language surrounding that topic and how hopefully we continue to grow to move away from that language. But
yeah. What language would you recommend? Being, obviously in the midst of it, what do you hear and just like cringe and go, ugh, I wish that person was more educated and knew how to speak on the subject better? How can, tell our viewers what to say?
So I would say one thing that always makes me cringe for sure, not in a judgmental way at all, just like, oh, I want to help you in this moment, but I will not interrupt you while you're talking, is when people, an expectant mom versus a birth mom. You're not a birth mom until yes, ultimately, like I'm a birth mom to the son I'm parenting right now. Yes, like I'm his biological mom. But there have been words that have been set, terms that have been set in place in order to distinctly determine one person's role in this child's life than another. And so it is important to use those terms appropriately. And one of those terms is expectant mom versus birth mom. An expectant mom is someone who is pregnant and and whether she's choosing to parent or making an adoption plan, whatever she's doing, she's currently pregnant. She is not a birth mom until she puts pen to paper. First mom, if that's, some people prefer first mom. So I definitely think that's a huge one. And then I think, other than that, I think it kind of gets really specific to certain people in regards to what they desire to be called in adoption, or if there is a biological parent who's has kids who have gone through the system or are currently in that process. And so I think that varies, but that expectant versus birth mom, I hear a lot of people call all women, like through foster care, through being pregnant, through if she like even mentions adoption at all, or her story may lead to foster care, she's automatically a birth mom, and it's like that's not the case. So
yeah, absolutely. So I stepped into your story before you and I knew each other, where I knew the adoptive parents of your son about 7 months, I think, after the adoption had been finalized. And they were reaching out to me as I joined staff at Watermark of just, hey, what should this relationship look like? How do we navigate some of this relationship? And so would you speak into some of the nuances and differences of things that even you learned from your perspective from a closed adoption versus an open adoption, and maybe start by just explaining like what that is, the difference between those two things?
Yeah, so a closed adoption means you absolutely have no contact. So no updates, no anything. There's no contact. The woman, the birth parent had signed her rights over to the adoptive family, and or the child is in foster care and or you adopted through foster care and you have no communication with their biological family. And there's open adoption, which they they say semi-open or open.
Yeah,
And
of an open adoption. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like there's no degree on like what a semi or open can mean. So many different things to so many different people. The idea, though, is that there is some communication, whether that be once every 5 years or once every year, one update. You're seeing each other every week, every day. Who knows? I mean, there's like all kinds of levels of what that relationship should or can look like. So there's that. And then, yeah, I think for us, we started closed, and I thought that was going to be the best thing for my healing. And so that goes back to not educating myself on what adoption really was before making that decision. So and nobody pushed back on that, to be honest. It was just very much like, okay, you want closed, that's fine, you can do that. That means you won't have any communication. And I thought, yeah, I will be able to move on, quote unquote, after this. And it was easy to say that in the midst of that because I was really detaching myself and in denial about being pregnant. So it was really easy to feel like that was, yeah, but I felt not lots of emotions as I was pregnant. When I felt him kick or anything, I didn't experience a lot during pregnancy.
Do you think nobody pushed in on the not sharing with you about openness because there was this sense of like, yeah, cutting you off totally will be better for you and better for them in the long run? Do you think there was that kind of like, I don't know, maybe just misconception of what's actually in the best interest of a child, knowing and having a relationship with their biological mom, even if it's not the same type of relationship, if it's more like an aunt than it is a mom? Do you think just people kind of mentally go, oh yeah, that's what's in their best interest, and maybe even in your best interest?
Yeah, I think that I said that before I gave the adoptive family an option or space to even share that they wanted open. And so they desired open before they even met me, I believe, from my understanding. And I think I know, but I always want them to be able to speak for themselves. And that my view on it is that it was the responsibility of the agency and the professional involved which was our caseworkers involved, to push back on that. And so there is no education for expectant moms. And if there is, I mean, I've met one agency that claims to give pre-education as an option. But even then, it's kind of funny because the adoptive families who probably could find more access to this information, even if nobody made them do it, a lot easier than expectant moms who are walking through this situation in the most fearful, emotional decision I probably have ever made in my whole life was deciding whether I wanted closed or open, and nobody blinked or batted an eyelash. Everybody was like, okay. And I don't think that was necessarily the responsibility of the adoptive family to push back on, as they're just starting to get to know me, and that's not their role in my life, at least specifically for me. And for our relationship, I don't believe that would be their role. So I don't necessarily know if it was because that I think that the educators or the professionals know that wouldn't be best for my grief and for my healing, but they still allowed me to make that decision.
Yeah. So I just want to jump in and kind of give you a break because you've been sharing a lot of your story and I love it. But I do want to just echo the sentiment of really parenting is God's plan A. And I know there are a lot of prospective adoptive couples out there that experience infertility and that are saying things like, adoption for me is now God's plan B. And so somehow it's second best. And so we tend to do sort of those theological gymnastics and really lose sight of what God is doing in the midst of sort of the sin in the world that takes place as he just goes, look, he is a God that does not take away life, but devises ways so that he might restore us. And that's not just for us who are experiencing infertility, who are going, I really want a child. And so, I've not met an adoptive couple that's been like, I want a mom to lose her child or to experience crisis so that I can have a child. But there is sort of that one-sidedness that I just think is unhealthy. It's certainly unbiblical. And we have taken the priority to say, look, we want a mom to parent. We want to be able to equip her and come alongside her in a very genuine way, in a very well-resourced way, where we just go, look, we're willing to walk alongside you, not for the next few months, but for the next several years, so that you have community, so that you have support, so that you have the things that you need, and you don't have to fear judgment from everybody or kind of the slight look to the side as you walk by with your newborn and you're obviously not married because you don't have a wedding, all those things that I think rush into people's heads that are realistic, and yet at the same time shouldn't be a part of who we are as the church to bring shame to people. And so I just think it's key to go, look, we've got to look at the biblical precedent that is parents parenting their biological children, not adoption. So for as much as God makes a way through adoption, it's not the precedent that he biblically sets. There is not a single example throughout all of Scripture where God says, I am taking a child from one family and putting them into another family, and that is the primary priority way that I want to grow families. So there are lots of things that people bring up. Are like, what about Moses? Well, I'm not sure that that's really a great example or illustration of what God had in mind. And so you see sort of this kinsman redeemer idea where you have families that do care for their nieces or nephews or cousins. We have like Esther and Mordecai, and even kind of Ruth and Naomi in a weird way. But the priority has always been family restoration. And so as I've kind of riffed on that kind of concept, Dominique, would you speak to what it's looked like to then kind of how y'all move from this closed adoption mindset to an open adoption mindset, and what your relationship with Everett looks like now?
That is such a great point, and I think that speaks right into what you're asking. I think that Allie and Ryan, Everett's adoptive parents, they do struggle with infertility, and that is a part of their story that they openly and willingly share. And they still, to this day, tell me, no matter what, our plan A was to never adopt Everett, even though that they were struggling with infertility. And so I think the way, because and I don't know what work they already did before meeting me, that the Lord did work in their hearts, and to just make their view on that so different. Their desire was to never fill this hole in their family, but was to always care for me. And if that looked like caring for Everett as his parents, then that they were open to that. And so that, because that was their mindset, that changed completely the dynamic of our relationship, because there's not this push or pull or this fight against, it's never ever been this fight against who is more Everett's mom than the other, and this like fight to really define each other's roles. They are the roles that they are because that's what the Lord made a way for, as I decided to make that decision, made a way for me to do. And she doesn't try to be me, and I don't try to be her. And so I think that really, exactly what you were saying, when you're able to grow out of that mindset and really remove yourself from that mindset and realize how detrimental it can be to have that mindset, then you it opens up a whole new way to have a relationship. And so it started off extremely rocky. And so I don't want anybody to hear me say that our relationship is perfect or the walls are perfect in the way that they've pursued me, or that I'm perfect in the way that I've been pursued by them or attempted to pursue them back. We have had a very rocky start to our relationship, and it was arguing. I mean, I was not a believer back then, and I was openly spiteful, jealous, mean, and attempting to create division with the people walking around us. And so, and that was all just stemming from my grief. It had nothing to do with them. I always give the example that it's like if you wrote a story about every bad thing you did in your life and then handed me that book, and then I wrote down every really great thing about myself and then handed you that book, you would feel a lot of shame as you were sitting there in front of me reading your book and I was reading yours. And so that's kind of that dynamic. I just felt so much shame. Like I was like, really ugly things about me, and I just see this perfection. And so it started off rocky, but really they just pursued me no matter what. And so after a while, I just started realizing that no matter what I did to them, they weren't going to leave. And so it was a lot easier to give in to and allowing them a space to love me well, instead of trying to force back their love with hate towards them. So we just started openly communicating, and it went well for us after a very long while.
Can I ask you, so you said something I think is really profound. You said that it was like they got a book of all the bad stuff that you had done that had brought you into the relationship, and you got all the good stuff about them, because adoptive parents have to kind of put that book together that, it's like, hey, we're competent people that are going to care for the child that is in your womb. Please pick us. And so that is so crazy. I've never thought about it that way, in that like they're getting what you perceive as the worst version of you, and you're getting the best version of them. And then you're trying to find this weird equal playing field that just is not equal at all. Can't be. And so that is mind numbing to me, that we've kind of set that system up where you're the bad guy and they're the good guys. Would you speak any more into that or share anything more about that?
What was the most helpful in that is that once I was able to put words to that and vocalize that I felt like they were perfect, and trying not to cry here. I think that it's so easy to show when you it just goes into all of these things, like, why aren't they showing up to visit? Okay, well, why would they want to show up to a visit? Like, failing you. Like, they already felt like they failed their child, and now they have to go and perform in front of you because they're trying to make up for all of the really bad things you know about them. And so it just becomes this, like, a really exhausting inner battle that's like, nobody knows what's going on, and it feels like nobody understands. And then they show up to visits and they're like all happy and like bringing you cake or gifts or flowers, and you're just like, wow, like, you have no idea that I'm like about to lose my apartment. I'm just gonna put on a happy face. And when I was finally able to voice like, hey, I feel like y'all are perfect, Allie was like, oh no, girl, let me tell you how messed up I really am. And so once I started, she was able to like share more of her story with me, and they would come and they were really honest. And I think to certain extents, just to really read the situation and read where your relationship is with this expectant mom or birth parent, is to how much you share. Just like with the child, you are just age appropriate, and so age appropriate to your relationship and the length that it's been in. But it was really sweet because she would just start being really open. She was just like, yeah, if I would ask for something, she would say little things that were so big for me and maybe were really simple for her to just say them. But she would say things like, hey, I'm a green light on this, Ryan's a red light, and this is why Ryan's a red light, or vice versa. And I was able to be like, wait, y'all aren't perfect? It's like, y'all argue in marriage? Like, what? That's insane. I didn't know that you guys don't get along sometimes. And she was like, you know, and so I've never been married. And so it's so crazy in my mind how I look back, and I still have to fight the urge to believe that Allie's perfect and that she never gets it wrong. And I just had this conversation with her the other day, and a girl in my community group. I was sharing some things that I just never really opened up about our adoption a lot, or my feelings towards it. And I started to kind of had a breakdown, and the girl in my community group has gotten to know Allie and was just like, you could totally tell Allie all of those things. And I realized so quickly that I'm like, whoa, I've been like allowing this space for bitterness to grow towards Allie, or like anger towards her that she's not even aware of or could be made aware of, because I'm so scared of feeling like I failed her and I'm not good enough and she's perfect and like up here. And even if she does something hurtful to me, it must be my fault. It can't be her fault because she's perfect and I'm definitely the problem. And so it's this really huge tug constantly of just remembering, like bringing them off of this pedestal that I've put them on.
Yeah.
And ultimately the system has put them on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, that's like really mind opening. For me, somebody who I have not had the privilege to adopt or been in that world before. So that's great just to think about from an outsider's perspective. I did have one last question for you, just following up. It sounds like God has really used your story and has grown you through the process. And I didn't know if you could just speak into that for a minute, like where you were before to where you are now. How has God used you?
Yeah. It's been a really crazy, wild ride, and I always forget how short it's been, just because there's been so much change. But yeah, I mean, I just used to be so I had so many things, wounds that were left unprocessed, and it just showed in so many ways, in the way that I was partying and drinking and seeking affirmation and men, and just really desiring to just be fully known somewhere, and anything that could make me feel fully known, I would do it. And so that would mean being really mean to certain people to try to get closer to other people, being divisive, like being spiteful, just pure rebellion from anything the Bible says. And ultimately, this woman, Tracy, and Liz, and Ryan kept pouring in the truth, even when I didn't want to hear it. And slowly I was like, I saw a light in them, and I desired so badly, even as I saw them go through really, really hard things, I would just be like, why does it look, why can you still smile? Why aren't you so upset and angry about this? And they would cry, and they would be upset, and they would grieve things, but they weren't just completely, utterly broken because of these things. And they just always had hope for more. And so I was like, what is that? I want that. Like, I want to grow in those ways. And so as it continued to pour into me, my life slowly started to change, and I jumped into a community group at Watermark, and that failed. I completely ruined that, to be honest. That community group didn't work out, mainly because of my actions. And then it was like, okay, I'm gonna try. I kind of shunned a little bit of like, I'm done. Like, I'm not gonna do this. I can't play this perfect role. And for a while, I just thought, okay, I'm just gonna stop cursing, and I'm gonna stop drinking, and I'm gonna stop going to hang out with these guys and partying, and I'm gonna stop doing these things, and then I will be just like Liz and Allie. And then I realized quickly that that's it's not about behavior modification. It was about heart change. And so as I really just desired to seek out the Lord, I went through Region, I got into another community group. I just was able to really surrender everything. And then I still struggle to remind myself that I am fully known, that I don't need to be fully known by every single person, or I don't need to force that on them, I should say. That you have to know me, you have to know all of my thoughts. And it's like the Lord knows all of them. And like if he wants to make that aware to them, then he will. And like in those conversations, and there just doesn't have to be forced to it. And so I just found a lot of healing through that, and in vulnerability of sharing my story and not feeling shame and stepping out of that, and not allowing the enemy to just completely, again, just paralyze me into a state of isolation where you can't set free from that because you've been there for so long. And then it just, or at least it makes you feel like you can't set free. Like there's too much to tell. There's too many lies that have been told. There's too much I have to process. And so it's more comfortable to stay here. And so it was really hard, but it is really hard. I continue to be challenged every day, and have to fight against my flesh every single day. And I don't get it perfect. And there's not a finish line here on earth. And so I'm thankful for that I don't ever have to reach this point of like perfection with the Lord, that he accepts me where I'm at. And he's just working through every situation. And he's really just shown that to me in so many moments where I felt like he was silent. He was not. He was working like in the craziest of all details, that I would later come to find out like that only happened because of God. And so, yeah, it's been fun, wild, and scary and crazy, but it's been ultimately really just sweet. And I'm just thankful just for our church body. Really.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's so true. None of us are perfect, definitely far from perfection. And man, it's such a blessing that we do have a Father who is perfect and fills in all those holes and gaps for us. And I just want to thank you again for joining us, Dominique, and sharing your story with everyone. And thank you to everyone who tuned in. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. I want to wrap up by encouraging you all to reach out to us on Facebook or Instagram with any thoughts or questions you had during tonight's show. You can also reach us by email at thelifeinitiative@watermark.org. And if you or someone you know is experiencing an unexpected pregnancy, we want you to know that you can always contact us at pregnant@watermark.org. And maybe you need resources and support, or maybe you just need someone to listen. Either way, we're here for you. If abortion is part of your story and you're looking for healing and love, please reach out to us at healing@watermark.org. We'd love to connect. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great night. If you particularly enjoyed Dominique's story and want to learn more, check out a short documentary by the Archibald Project covering the first 48 hours of Everett's life and what Dominique was thinking, processing, and feeling leading up to the adoption. Check it out at the link here.